Hey everyone, and welcome to the very first explainer in our brand new series, The Psychology of Happiness. Today's explainer is officially titled Meaning, Nature, and Dimensions of Happiness. And man, we are going to embark on a truly fascinating journey today. I mean, think about it. For thousands of years, philosophers, theologians, and literally just everyday people have been chasing this completely elusive concept we call happiness. But what is it really? Especially in our hyper-connected modern world, where, let's be honest, so many of us are just exhausted, anxious, and endlessly chasing things that ultimately leave us feeling kind of empty. Figuring out true well-being is absolutely critical right now. Is happiness just that fleeting, awesome feeling you get when you eat your absolute favorite dessert? Or is it something much deeper, something that actually anchors you during the really tough times? Today, we are going to rely on hard, grounded psychological research to systematically unpack the whole shebang. We'll be transitioning all the way from simple, momentary pleasure to profound, enduring human flourishing.
Okay, let's dive right into our roadmap for today. We'll start by defining true happiness. Then we'll examine the nature of happiness, move into the inner dimensions, zoom out to explore social and cultural connections, and finally wrap things up with moral and spiritual meaning. All right, let's kick things off with section 1, defining true happiness. So before we can talk about how to build happiness, we kind of need to know what we're actually building, right? Let's systematically dismantle a really common myth right out of the gate. Happiness is not just about feeling momentary pleasure or catching a quick burst of joy. In modern psychology, researchers actually use a broader, way more precise term. They call it subjective well-being. Pioneering psychologist Ed Diner defined this as a person's evaluation of their own life, which includes both affective, emotional responses and cognitive judgments. Let's really unpack that because it's incredibly important. The affective part, well, that's what you feel directly in your gut, the presence of positive emotions and the relative absence of negative ones. But the cognitive part is what you think. It's your reflective, big picture judgment. Imagine a medical student right in the middle of grueling finals. Their affective state might be totally stressed out, with almost zero momentary positive emotions. But if you stop and ask them to evaluate their life as a whole, their cognitive judgment might actually be incredibly high, because they know they're working toward a deeply meaningful goal. You just can't have a comprehensive understanding of well-being without looking at both the feeling in the moment and the thoughtful evaluation over time. Now, this massive shift in how we define happiness didn't just happen by accident. Back in the year 2000, psychologists Martin Seligman and Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi argued that, quote, psychology should study positive subjective experience, positive individual traits, and positive institutions. And let me tell you, this was a monumental pivot for the entire field. For decades before this, psychology was heavily, almost exclusively, focused on illness, distress, and pathology. It was essentially a disease model, just fixing what was broken in the human mind. But here's the catch. Curing depression doesn't automatically mean you're creating happiness, right? It really just brings a person back to a baseline of zero. Modern positive psychology completely shifted the scholarly focus towards human strengths, flourishing, and optimal functioning. Researchers finally realized that preventing emptiness and despair means we actually have to rigorously study what makes life worth living in the first place. Moving right along to section 2, the nature of happiness. Now that we have a really solid definition, we can shift into the underlying architecture of happiness. The nature of happiness basically relies on 4 key characteristics. First up, it is multidimensional. You absolutely cannot boil it down to a single factor. A person could achieve massive financial success, but if they lack inner peace or strong relationships, well, their well-being is incomplete. Second, it is highly subjective. 2 people can live in the exact same economic and social circumstances, yet evaluate their lives completely differently based on their personal values, coping styles, and perceptions. Third, and I think this is the most encouraging part, it is dynamic. It is definitely not a fixed, rigid trait you're just born with. While genetics and life circumstances absolutely play a role, comprehensive research by scholars like Sonia Lyubomirsky reveals that a massive portion of our happiness is dictated by intentional activities, your everyday voluntary habits. Things like deliberately practicing gratitude, cultivating optimism, or just doing random acts of kindness. These can actively and permanently move the needle on your baseline happiness. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the 4th characteristic, the distinction between hedonic and eudaimonic happiness. Hedonic happiness, which was deeply studied by researchers like Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman, is all about pleasure, comfort, and positive feelings. It's that sheer joy of eating an amazing meal, buying a cool new gadget, or just relaxing on a beach. It feels amazing, for sure, but it's fleeting. Eudaimonic happiness is an entirely different beast. Rooted in ancient Aristotelian philosophy, it's about meaning, virtue, self-realization, and fulfilling your deepest human potential.
Take raising a child, for example. It might be incredibly low in moment-to-moment hedonic pleasure. I mean, it is exhausting and stressful, but it is astronomically high in eudaimonic fulfillment. If you only chase hedonic pleasure, you might feel good temporarily, but you'll likely end up on what psychologists call a hedonic treadmill, constantly needing more and more just to feel the same high, and eventually feeling pretty empty. A complete, robust life absolutely requires both perspectives working together in harmony. Which brings us to Section 3, the inner dimensions. Transitioning into the deeply personal experience of well-being, we have to start with the emotional dimension. Experiencing joy, love, and interest isn't just about feeling warm and fuzzy. Psychologist Barbara Fredrickson developed this groundbreaking idea called the broaden and build theory. She discovered that while negative emotions like fear or anger narrow our focus into a strict survival mindset, that classic fight or flight response, positive emotions do the exact opposite. They actively broaden our momentary thought-action tendencies. When you feel joy, you naturally become more playful and creative. When you feel interest, you're driven to explore and take in new information. And over time, these broadened actions build massive long-term intellectual, physical, and social resources. By playing, you build physical skills and social bonds. By exploring, you build knowledge. Positive emotions are not just superficial luxuries. They are literally the evolutionary building blocks of human resilience and personal growth. Running parallel to our emotions is the cognitive dimension. Remember Ed Diner's concept of life satisfaction we talked about? Well, a huge part of our happiness is determined by how we evaluate our lives against our own chosen standards. Essentially, happiness is heavily shaped by how you manage the gap between your aspirations and your reality. If your aspirations are completely unrealistic, or if that gap is massive and feels totally unmanageable, deep dissatisfaction breeds. And this is exactly where the cognitive habit of optimism becomes a real game changer. Optimistic individuals evaluate their reality differently. When they face a setback, they don't view it as permanent or pervasive. Instead, they view problems as temporary, specific, and manageable. By actively reframing their thoughts, they effectively close the gap between where they are and where they want to be, fiercely protecting their cognitive well-being. Beyond just our momentary emotions and thoughts, we possess these deep, fundamental psychological needs. This brings us to the famous self-determination theory, proposed by psychologists Edward Deci and Richard Ryan. They found that human well-being rests on a non-negotiable foundation of 3 core psychological needs. Step 1 is autonomy. Now, this doesn't just mean total independence. It means feeling like you have meaningful choices and that you genuinely endorse your own actions. Step 2 is competence. This is that great feeling of being capable and effective in your environment, like mastering a complex new skill at work or finally overcoming a tough challenge. Step 3 is relatedness, which is the profound need to feel securely connected to and understood by others. Think about what happens if just one of these is missing. You could be a highly competent and fully autonomous CEO, but if you have zero relatedness and are completely isolated, your psychological well-being will inevitably collapse. Fulfilling all 3 creates an unshakable foundation. So the crucial point is perfectly summarized by psychologist Carol Riff. She states, happiness should not be reduced to pleasure alone because true psychological well-being includes self-acceptance, positive relations with others, autonomy, purpose in life, and personal growth. This pretty much entirely encapsulates the psychological dimension. True happiness isn't just some passive wave of good feelings that occasionally washes over you. It is the active, continuous, and sometimes really difficult process of functioning well. It begs the question, are you merely chasing your next pleasurable moment, or are you actively working toward becoming a more integrated, self-aware person? Let's zoom out a bit for Section 4, social and cultural connections. We're going to zoom out now from the individual mind to explore how our connections with the outside world directly dictate our happiness. Look, humans are fundamentally, biologically social creatures. Extensive research by psychologists like Lubomirsky, King, and Diner found that good relationships and a sense of belongingness are quite literally the strongest and most consistent correlates of well-being across the globe. Positive affect is deeply intrinsically tied to sociability, close friendships, and reliable social support. But it extends way beyond just your immediate circle of friends into something called collective happiness. The environment you live in absolutely matters. A broader society marked by high civic trust, justice, low corruption, and cooperation creates a psychological safety net. When a society functions well collectively, individual flourishing becomes infinitely easier to achieve. And this brilliantly illustrates how happiness scales all the way up to the cultural dimension. Culture actually dictates the very definition of what a good life looks like. In an individualistic culture, which is predominantly found in the West, the core focus is heavily placed on individual achievement and self-expression.
The key values championed are personal choice, high self-esteem, and high arousal emotions like excitement and pride. Conversely, in a collectivistic culture, commonly found in East Asia, the focus dramatically shifts to group harmony, familial duty, and maintaining social balance. The prioritized values are belongingness, discipline, and low arousal emotions like calmness and serenity. Because of this, the exact same life event can trigger completely different well-being outcomes. Moving across the country for a high-paying promotion might yield massive happiness in an individualistic society, but it could produce deep guilt and diminished well-being in a collectivistic society if it disrupts family harmony. Happiness is indeed a universal human pursuit, but its expression is beautifully and complexly diverse.
Finally, we reach Section 5, Moral and Spiritual Meaning.
We now transition to the absolute deepest layer of our zoom out journey, exploring how ethics and self-transcendence provide an existential foundation for human potential. Positive psychology identifies moral happiness as well-being derived from strong character, ethical living, and altruism. Actually, think about it. Happiness completely stripped of morality often becomes unstable, fiercely self-centered, and sometimes even harmful to the community. Acts of compassion, fairness, and forgiveness connect our individual actions to values much larger than our own selfish pleasure. Then we have spiritual happiness. From a psychological standpoint, this isn't necessarily about organized religion or specific dogmas, though it certainly can be for many people. It is fundamentally about inner peace, self-transcendence, and the profound feeling of awe. It's the realization of a deeper truth, or just feeling connected to the wider universe. Researchers study these traits seriously because this spiritual, transcendent dimension is precisely what elevates the human experience from temporary sensory enjoyment to an enduring state of harmony.
Wow, we've covered a tremendous amount of ground today, transitioning all the way from the baseline definitions of subjective well-being to the complex, multidimensional nature of emotional, cognitive, social, and spiritual flourishing. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with this final provocative question. Which dimension of happiness might you be neglecting in your own life? Are you perhaps focusing far too much on hedonic pleasure while totally forgetting eudaimonic meaning? Are you neglecting your vital social connections, or maybe ignoring your psychological need for true autonomy? Take some time today to reflect deeply on your own multidimensional well-being. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. If you found this structured, comprehensive breakdown helpful, please make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel so we can continue exploring these fascinating topics together. See you in the next one.